Well, welcome to North Shore, everybody. It is great to see you, those of you who are gathered in this room. And I want to say hello to everybody who's joining us online, wherever you're watching from. It is a great day to be together. It's a great day to be in this place, a great day to be where you are. And we're going to be learning a lot about relationships today because it's really something that's been kind of at the front line of this whole pandemic experience is the way it's impacted the way we connect, relate, belong, love, experience community. In fact, there's been a number of what I would call relational low moments for me and for a lot of people, and even videos that have spread virally around the country from people not behaving maybe at their best. Ever seen one of those kind of going around maybe on a plane or in a restaurant? In fact, one happened this past week. Some of you have seen this one at a Golden Corral restaurant in Pennsylvania. Anyone ever been to a Golden Corral? Yeah, the endless buffet. Someone just goes, that's so good. So there's a lot of joy around that one. Well, somebody thought in this particular restaurant, the endless buffet wasn't so endless, they're gonna run out of something. So they broke in line, which instigated kind of an argument, which led to a bigger argument, which led to a fight between 40 people in the restaurant. There was kicking, screaming, yelling, punching. You can find this online. You can just Google Golden Corral. You won't get a menu. You're going to get a fight if you do that. In fact, I saw someone in the video attacking somebody else with like a child seat, like a kid's chair. So all of us say, y'all, we need prayer right now in this country because things are kind of getting loose. But all that's to say is, people have really reached their breaking point, right? Many of you have reached maybe you didn't lose it at a restaurant, but you lost it with someone you care about. Or maybe you feel like, it's not all public on, a viral video, but like you've hit a line where it's like you feel worn out or burned out and it's causing an impact in the lives of the people you care about the most. And that's really what this series, Relationship Goals, is all about. It's how to care for, repair, improve, rebuild those relationships in our lives that really matter most, because that's really the purpose of life. So much is around our relationships. And today, we're actually talking about something that I wish we didn't have to talk about, but it's a real part of life, and it's a real confusing part of life, and it's a really painful part of life. And as soon as I say this, some of you will know exactly what I'm talking about. We're talking about toxic people and what to do about them. Toxic people and what to do about them. In fact, I wanted to start with a list of all the toxic people here in our church. I'm just gonna put it up here. No, you can put that off for a second. We're not gonna start there. That'd be more like a toxic pastor. But the reality is, we all have someone in our lives who's toxic. Or maybe you will someday. And when I say toxic, I don't actually mean, now I have the slides ready, I don't mean difficult, okay? Difficult people, challenging people are actually good for us, really. In fact, I think God often brings difficult people into our lives to help us grow. It's why he invented toddlers, right? So we would learn patience in those moments when you want to throw a chair through a window. God brings difficult people in your life, and there's often a really good reason for it. And the idea of a toxic person is also not the same thing as somebody who's hard to love. Because, we all have people in our lives that can be hard to love. Maybe it's because of the way they live. Maybe it's because of what they believe. Maybe there's something about them that offends you. Maybe they're on the other end of the political spectrum from you. But here's the thing. That doesn't mean they're toxic. It just means you don't like them or you disagree with them or they offend you in some way. When I say toxic people, I mean people who are, toxic. I mean people who are continually lying or manipulating or blaming. I'm talking about that relationship in your life that you spent hours over the course maybe of years pouring into, investing, praying for, trying to improve, but that friend is still manipulative, or that family member still won't listen, that spouse is still unremorseful. You see, a toxic person is someone whose character or behavior poisons a relationship in such a way that makes them impossible to trust or even unsafe to be around. And here's why we have to talk about this. Some of you grew up in a home with someone like this. Some of you are friends with or you work with or you've got a boss who's something like this. Some of you have dated someone like this, or maybe you got married to someone like this. Like you didn't intend to make that choice, you didn't know that, but you found out, wow, I'm not sure I can even trust this person. And here's the thing, those of you who've been there, you know when you're in that situation, it's disorienting. It's difficult. It's painful. You feel like you're walking on eggshells. You're not sure how they're going to respond. Like you can't ever really just be vulnerable, be yourself, and entrust yourself to this person. And by the way, just so you know, I'm not doing this in a spirit of finger pointing or blame and talking about those toxic people out there. Sometimes the toxic people, well, they're in places like this, right? I mean, someone may listen to this talk one day and think about you because of some toxic pattern of behavior in your past. But here's the reality. At some point in your life, and if this hadn't happened, it's going to happen at some point, or you're going to know somebody who's going through this, they're going to need your counsel or your help. At some point, we're going to run into, encounter, be in a situation or relationship with someone whose character or behavior has become toxic. And the question for today is real simple. What do we do? Practically speaking, what do you actually do? How do you navigate it? Do you just keep trying and praying and working at it? Do you remove yourself? Can you remove yourself? Jesus says to love your neighbor, love people, love your enemies. Do I just have to kind of stick it out and experience all the consequences of their behavior? A few weeks ago, one of you actually reached out. You sent us this very question. You said, is there ever a time to walk away from a relationship or let go of a relationship when you've been fighting for that hasn't been receptive to your efforts? And then they said, how can we be like Jesus even in moments where we have to walk away from a relationship? Because, well, it's just toxic. So if you have a Bible or you have a Bible app on your phone, you can open it up or open that up to a book in the Old Testament, kind of back towards the beginning, a book called 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel, as you kind of turn to that or open to that, we're gonna be looking at a story from the life of one of the most toxic people in the Bible, this man named King Saul. Now, if you don't know any of his story, what you need to know is King Saul wasn't meant to be one of the bad guys, one of the toxic guys. He was supposed to be one of the good guys. God chose him to be king over Israel, Israel's very first king. But later, he kind of fell into these toxic patterns of behavior. We're gonna look at some of those today, particularly in regard to this other leader in his life, a guy named David. And he was extremely jealous of David. He was actually on the run to chase down, hunt down, and kill this guy, David. So David's kind of on the run from him. By the way, it's kind of a red flag for toxic people. They're actually trying to actually kill you. So that's an easy one to check that box, okay? But as broken as Saul's life became, he actually can help us learn how to identify and recognize toxic patterns of behavior. And then in this story, we're gonna see some practical guidelines for what to do about that. So 1 Samuel 22, starting in verse 6, you can read along with me here on the screen. Text says, now Saul, who's been looking for David, searching for him, heard that David and his men had been discovered. And Saul was seated, spear in hand, just remember that for a moment, spear in hand under the tamarisk tree on the hill at Gibeah, with all of his officials standing at his side. He said to them, listen, men of Benjamin. Now this isn't in the text, I'm gonna inject a little bit of tone that I kind of imagine here. Will the son of Jesse give all of you fields and vineyards? Oh, woe is me. Will he make all of you commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? Oh, poor my life. Is that why you have all conspired against me? I know it's not in the text, but you can hear the tone in these questions, right? No one tells me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse, that's David. None of you is concerned about me or tells me that my son has incited my servant to lie in wait for me as he does today. That's Saul's little spiel. But Doeg the Edomite, we'll talk about this guy a little bit, kind of a funny name. Doeg the Edomite was standing with Saul's officials and he said, I saw David, the son of Jesse, come to this guy named Ahimelech, who was a priest in another region. And so Saul calls the priest in. He calls him in and says, I want to talk to you about what you're doing there with David. And this is what Saul says to Ahimelech. He says, why have you conspired against me? You and David, the son of Jesse, giving him bread and a sword and inquiring of God for him so that, here's what he's saying, so that David has rebelled against me and now lies in wait for me as he does today. He kind of accuses him of this very thing. And Ahimelech's like, I didn't do that. I had no part with that. But when he defends himself, look at how Saul responds. He says, you will surely die, Ahimelech, you and your whole family. And then Saul orders some guards to go out and execute this order, which they don't do. We'll come back to that. But then Doeg the Edomite, our little friend, actually goes and he does this, and he goes far beyond this. He goes out, takes care of Ahimelech and his family, and destroys their whole town. So we're gonna pause for a moment. It's an exciting story, isn't it? Sort of interesting story. Now, if you had to create kind of an online dating profile for Saul, it might look something like this. This is really good stuff, okay? First of all, just so you know, we're gonna walk through these. Saul, because again, this isn't just pop psychology, this is in the Bible today, folks, okay? Saul is exceedingly jealous. This whole story is built around his envy, his compulsion around David, because he's worried that David's doing better than he is, which of course is a sign that he's quite self-absorbed and narcissistic. Remember that detail about having the spear in his hand? Think about that. He's sitting under the shade of a tree, surrounded by guards, not in danger, no threats to his life, holding a spear. Why? Because he wants you to know, I'm Saul, I'm the guy, I'm the most powerful person. Look at me, focus on me, totally self-absorbed. Everything revolves around Saul. And that's so true with toxic people. Toxic people care about one person. Who is it? It's themselves, right? That's the only person they care about. And of course, as you heard in my tone, Saul was quite passive aggressive. Why are you all supporting David? Like, why are you all doing that? He doesn't ask you, are you on David's side? He doesn't go directly. He speaks passive aggressively, and he's quite manipulative. None of you are concerned about me. Not actually true. He spins the truth there. None of you are telling me that David's plotting to kill me. David wasn't plotting to kill him. He's also spinning the truth. You see, people who are toxic will twist the truth. They'll spin the truth to try to keep you in control. And he's quick to blame. He finds this priest, Ahimelech. He blames him. And when Ahimelech's like, I didn't do anything, he escalates the conflict. He takes it from a 2 to a 10, threatens his family. I'm gonna kill your whole family. And he demands loyalty. Guards, go do this. And of course, when they don't, our friend Doeg the Edomite, he does it. And with toxic people, it's like, they always make you pick a side, don't they? There's no neutral. There's no, I'm gonna kind of figure it out. It's like, you're on my side or you're out. And of course, when Doeg goes out and does this horrible thing, what does Saul do? He doesn't critique him. He doesn't say, you went well past my actual command. He feels no remorse. And by the way, with toxic people, when they apologize, they're not saying that they're sorry because they feel remorse. They're sorry that they got caught. They're sorry that there's consequences. They feel sorry that the circumstances are worse for them. Saul lacks remorse. And of course, all through the story, he's unwilling to listen. And this may be the biggest red flag. It's a character trait throughout his life. He's unwilling to listen to God. He won't listen to the prophet Samuel. He won't even listen to his son Jonathan. Won't listen. Not at all. And friends, this list is really a great way to identify, recognize a toxic person in your life. And I'm not just saying they have one or two of these. Some of you are like, oh my gosh, I'm calling somebody today because, I saw them be passive aggressive. No, one or two of these on your worst day, that's normal. We all have those days, right? Right? Is it just me? Maybe it's just me. Maybe you're all doing perfect. You're dismissed to go home. You're fine. You don't need this message. At least I have days where these will be true for me. A toxic person has an ongoing, increasing, kind of full, expansive of all these characteristics in such a way that makes a relationship with them basically impossible. Can't be in a relationship with someone who's like this. And some of you have tried, you're trying right now. Could be with a family member, a friend, someone you're dating, your spouse. So what do we do? How do we respond to someone like that? Well, the first thing isn't something we have to go and do. It's actually something we may need to stop doing, because when it comes to toxic situations or toxic relationships, there's a few really common mistakes that anyone, all of us can make in navigating through these really difficult situations. The first one that happens around toxic people is we often just tend to overlook it. Like, it's complicated, it's difficult, I'm not sure what to do or say, I feel like it's a little bit risky, I'm nervous, so we just kind of overlook it. And remember, with Saul, he wasn't just a toxic leader, he was an attractive, charismatic, powerful, compelling leader. People wanted him to succeed. They were invested in his success. In fact, when he was anointed as king, the text says that he was as handsome a young man as can be found anywhere in Israel. People liked to look at this guy. And he was a head taller than anyone else. He was powerful and domineering, and people wanted him to be their leader. which raises a really important principle when it comes to, how we overlook toxic people, and it's this: the more gifted or attractive or charismatic a person is, the more likely you are to overlook toxic patterns of behavior. And by the way, this is true today in dating relationships. People going back to that same person over and over, even after their bad behavior because they're attracted to them or they're not sure what to do with life without them. It happens in families. People make excuses for people's bad behavior or a family member because they're related to them, they love them. It happens in workplaces. Oh, and guess where else this happens? Happens in churches too, doesn't it? Some of you have been part of a church with toxic leadership. And here's the thing, you know this, it's incredibly damaging. I just want to kind of pause and camp here for a moment because it's been such a prevalent thing to see churches, leaders, cultures kind of fall into these terrible toxic patterns. It's one of the reasons, by the way, why I, as a senior pastor, my character shouldn't be questioned less because of my job. It should be questioned more. And not because of anything uniquely wrong with me, but because the more power or money or influence or charisma you have or have been given, the more likely it is for people to overlook toxic patterns of behavior. In fact, one of the requests I made to our board just this year was to create what we're calling a senior pastor care team. And their goal as a team for me isn't to monitor my performance as a pastor. Their goal is to monitor my health as a person. They're not worried about how this sermon goes, how the giving's going, how the program's going. They're worried about how's Scotty doing? How's Nina doing? How's their marriage doing? How's his character doing? Are the things we need to be thinking about on that front. Because we've seen leader after leader in the church, in the parachurch, in the marketplace fall. And it's not because those leaders set out to be toxic people. Nobody sets out to become a toxic person, right? Saul, his first response when he was told he was going to be king was, I shouldn't be king. Come from the wrong tribe. I'm not kind of the right guy. It shouldn't be me. But as the years went by, he started to become the kind of person he probably never imagined he could be because of his charisma, people were willing to overlook it. So just question for you, as you think about the people in your mind right now on the subject, what are you willingly overlooking, even right now? As you think about that, another mistake that we make with toxic people or toxic relationships is we will actually enable it. We will enable it. Our good friend Doeg the Edomite, he didn't cause Saul to behave the way, but he enabled it. He supported it. And here's the thing, most toxic people have someone close around them or multiple people close around them that are enabling them in some way. It happens in relationships where a spouse will enable the irresponsible behavior or other behaviors of their spouse. Parents do this with their kids, right? They will enable them by maybe avoiding the consequences of decisions. They don't want to have to deal with that, so they almost enable that behavior. When it comes to toxic people, someone is almost always enabling part of it. So question, as you think about these kind of situations, you got to look deep inside. Are there ways that you might be enabling that? Which leads to another mistake that we often make around toxic relationships. We try to change it. I know this sounds counterintuitive because you're supposed to change people, aren't you? I mean, that's kind of what we want to do. We want to change them, help them grow, call it out. And so we try so hard to change them. But here's the thing. It is almost impossible to change a toxic person. That's what makes them toxic. Not interested in changing. And here's the real risk. When you're around them, they don't change. Guess who changes? You do. Kind of a way I like to think about this, why I have these interesting cups up here. It's kind of like food coloring and water, if you think about that. Here's some food coloring and some water, and here's you just trying to be a good person. You want to change the toxic person, but when you mix these together, what happens? They start to look the same. You know? You get frustrated. You become impatient. You become angry. You feel hurt. And as the old saying goes, hurt people hurt people. And so this pattern continues and continues and continues. Even when we want to change, it's so hard, almost impossible to actually change a toxic person. So what do? Like if we can't overlook it, if we shouldn't enable it, if we can't really change it, like what do we actually do? Well, those of you who have a King Saul in your life, you know these are complicated, delicate, almost case-by-case situations that can be really almost impossible to navigate. So I hear that, I know that, but there are a few really clear guidelines in this story that can help you navigate them as you sort through the situations that you're in. Just gonna walk through 3 real quick, and we'll close. First guideline is this: you have to set clear boundaries. You have to set clear boundaries. And by the way, the boundaries aren't for them. The boundaries are for you. Because toxic people don't have good boundaries. That's part of the problem. They're gonna ignore your boundaries. You have to set boundaries on you and your involvement with them. It's a great picture of this in Saul's story. Saul's angry, he's mad. He says to his guards, I want you to go out and kill this priest named Ahimelech. And I want you to see how they respond, or how the officials respond. The king's officials were unwilling to raise a hand to strike the priests of the Lord. In other words, they said no. It's a really important biblical word when it comes to dealing with toxic people, the word no, because it's a boundary, not for them, but for you and your involvement with them. Maybe you have a friend who's really manipulative. Maybe you need to step away from that friendship, set a boundary, say no. If you're dating someone who keeps lying to you over and over, it's probably time to stop dating them. Set a boundary, say no. If you're married and there's an ongoing pattern of deceit or neglect and your spouse is unwilling to listen or change, you may need to step away from even that marriage. Maybe that marriage needs to end, but not because God doesn't want you to be faithful or love that person, but the best way to love a toxic person is to set clear boundaries, because otherwise we enable that behavior. So how do we set those boundaries? It brings us to the second guideline that's really, really important. You gotta find safe people in your life. And some of you need this. Because I say this, you need to have a name or a place that comes to mind right now. If you don't have it, it's gonna be an action step for you this week. Safe people, someone who listens, someone who's compassionate, someone who understands, someone who doesn't judge or shame because they've been there. And this happens in this story. Right after that moment where all the priests are basically killed, one of them gets away. Look at what happens. But one son of Ahimelech named Abiathar escaped, and he fled to join David. He told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. And then David said to Abiathar that day, when Doeg the Edomite was there, I knew he would be sure to tell Saul, which of course he did. So I am responsible for the death of your whole family. So stay with me. Don't be afraid. The man who wants to kill you is trying to kill me too. You will be what? Safe in this relationship. Because David understands. David's been there. And David's not perfect. He actually owns his part. He's like, I have problems in my life too. It's really important that safe people, they're not perfect people. They're people who get it. And if you don't have a person in mind, this is something you need in your life, like ASAP. Could be someone in your life group. Could be a friend or a mentor or a pastor or a counselor. It could be a support group. And if you don't know where to turn, you can reach out to us anytime you want at care@northshore.church. You can reach out anonymously or you can reach out directly. You can let us know in the guest services if you want to today. But let us partner with you in finding safe people, because you will never be able to discern what to do next without safe people around you. And then one last guideline, and this can be maybe the most difficult one: set clear boundaries, find safe people, and then we have to give back grace. Even in the most toxic situations, we have to learn to give back grace. Why? Because everything in you will be tempted to respond like they do. You know? Unkind word for an unkind word. A passive-aggressive text for that passive-aggressive text. No remorse for no remorse. And I can only imagine that David, who was this rising star, felt like doing all those things because he was on the run for his life for no reason of his own, no cause of his own. And there are actually several moments when David could have put a stop to it. There's moments where he could have took his sword and taken Saul out, but he didn't. He gave back grace. In fact, one time when David could have done those things, he told Saul these words. He said, "May the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me, but my hand will not touch you." As the old saying goes, from evildoers comes evil deeds, so my hand won't touch you. David understands you can't redeem evil with evil. You can't fix toxic with just more toxic. And he realizes that he's in no position to judge. None of us are, because guess what? We've got toxic stuff in us too. You've got toxic stuff in your life too. And not only do we have toxic things in our lives, think about it this way. Most toxic people are who they are because somebody was toxic to them, right? When I was in middle school, there was a kid in my school who bullied me like all the time, over and over. And for years, I just hated this kid. I wanted him to experience all the hurt that I did. And then years later, I found out that he did. I discovered that all that time, his dad had been bullying him. Because most toxic people are who they are because someone was toxic to them, and someone was toxic to them, and someone was toxic to them. So who are you supposed to really blame? Who are you able to judge? I once heard someone say, when you're dealing with someone who's toxic, don't ask what's the matter with them. Ask what happened to them. Like, what pain are they carrying? What's hurt is going on in their story? That's why David says, my hand will not touch you. In other words, I'm not going to try to get even. I'm not going to try to get back at you. I'm going to let God avenge the wrongs you've done. And by the way, how did God avenge the wrongs that we've done? It's amazing, actually. He didn't attack or condemn. He came into the world in the person of Jesus, and then something remarkable, amazing happened. All these toxic people got really close to Jesus, but guess what happened? They didn't change him a bit. He stayed close, he drew in, and when he came close to a toxic person, he would pour into them, pray for them, love them, believe in them, redeem them, and guess what happened? Redemption happens. Grace happens. And if you don't believe me, guess what? There's another Saul in the Bible, in the New Testament, a guy who was just as angry, just as mean, just as powerful, just as toxic. No one thought he could change. And Jesus met him on the road to Damascus and knocked him to the ground and gave him what? Grace. Because Jesus is the only person who knows how to deal with toxic people. And by the way, that's what he's done for each of us, isn't it? We're here, I'm here, not because I've managed to avoid toxic behaviors. I'm here because Jesus is the person who's dealt with the toxic part of me and the toxic part of you. And that's what the power of the cross is all about. It can redeem even the most toxic person, which is why we have to entrust those people to God by setting clear boundaries and finding safe people and giving back grace, knowing it's not your job to change them. It's Jesus' job. Our job is to love people, even toxic people, and let God do the rest. And so we're gonna close in a really special way this morning. We're gonna receive communion. And by the way, if you're not sure what that is, this is a practice Jesus gave his church all the way back to the beginning. It's like the oldest practice in the church itself. It's the act of taking bread and juice as a sign, a reminder of what Jesus did for toxic people on the cross. Grace, forgiveness that you can receive, pour in, take into your life, take into your soul, take into your body, and be made new. The only requirement is that you know you need Jesus. That's it. And that you'll commit to seeing other people through the lens of the cross. Because when it comes to toxic people, you can either try to crucify them, or you can remember that someone has already been crucified for them. And that's what matters most. And so as we close in this last song, the elements are there in the chair in front of you, a little cup there that's got bread and juice. There's a gluten-free option for you in the back. If you need that, you can go back there. And as soon as I finish praying, we're gonna take these elements together. You can find bread or juice or drink in your home. If you're watching from home, just go grab those things now. And after I pray, we're gonna take these elements as we sing this last song as a reminder that we need grace too, so we can give grace out there with the toxic and difficult and challenging people in our lives. So would you pray with me? So Jesus, we come before you now. Toxic people with toxic relationships, in toxic situations. We can feel pain and struggle. We can feel unstable. We don't know what to do next. And so we come right now, just before your cross, right now, before the power of your redemption, the grace that can transform us from the inside out, can make all those toxins clean again. And so as we receive these elements, as we literally take them into our body, we want to be reminded of what you did for us on that cross and how your grace can make us new. And then help us, Jesus, as we go out into the world this week, help us set those boundaries and find safe people and give back grace. Not because we're in charge of changing them, but because you can, you still can. Help us know that you still have the power to change everything for anyone today, starting with us. Do that right now in our hearts, Jesus. And we pray this in your name as we take these elements. And everybody said, amen. You can take communion.